They say that some people are born manipulators, capable of weaving webs of deception so intricate that their victims don't realize they're trapped until it's too late. My name is William, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law's campaign to destroy my marriage through psychological manipulation and lies led me to orchestrate a revenge so thorough that it exposed her true nature to everyone she had ever deceived. My wife Sarah and I had been married for 4 years when her mother Margaret began what I now recognize as a systematic campaign to undermine our relationship. At first, her interference seemed like typical mother-in-law behavior, offering unsolicited advice, making subtle criticisms, and inserting herself into decisions that should have been between Sarah and me. Margaret had always been what people politely called strong-willed, but after Sarah's father died 2 years into our marriage, her need to control every aspect of Sarah's life became overwhelming. She claimed that she was only trying to protect Sarah and help her navigate the challenges of marriage and adulthood, but her actions revealed a much darker agenda. Margaret's manipulation was sophisticated and calculated. She understood Sarah's insecurities and emotional triggers better than anyone, and she used this knowledge to gradually erode Sarah's confidence in our marriage and in her own judgment. Margaret's goal wasn't just to control Sarah. It was to completely destroy our relationship and drive me out of Sarah's life permanently. The campaign began with small comments and observations that seemed innocent on the surface but were designed to plant seeds of doubt in Sarah's mind about our compatibility and my commitment to our marriage. Margaret would make remarks about how different Sarah and I were, suggesting that perhaps we had rushed into marriage without really understanding each other. Margaret would say things like, "I just worry that you and William want such different things from life," or, "I hope William appreciates how lucky he is to have someone as special as you." These comments were always framed as concern for Sarah's happiness, but they were actually designed to make Sarah question whether I truly valued her and whether our marriage was built on solid ground. Margaret also began inserting herself into our financial decisions and future plans. She would ask detailed questions about our budget, our savings goals, and our plans for buying a house or starting a family. When Sarah shared these details with her mother, Margaret would find reasons to criticize our choices or express concern about our financial stability. If we decided to save money for a vacation, Margaret would suggest that we should be more focused on building an emergency fund. If we talked about buying a house, Margaret would worry that we were taking on too much debt. If we mentioned wanting to start a family, Margaret would express concern about whether we could afford children. No matter what decisions we made, Margaret always had reasons why they were wrong or premature. What made Margaret's manipulation particularly insidious was the way she positioned herself as Sarah's primary source of support and guidance. She would tell Sarah that she was the only person who truly understood her and had her best interests at heart. Margaret would suggest that I was too young or inexperienced to provide the kind of emotional support that Sarah needed, and that Sarah should rely on her mother's wisdom and experience instead. Margaret began scheduling regular mother-daughter time with Sarah, claiming that it was important for them to maintain their close relationship despite Sarah's marriage. These sessions became opportunities for Margaret to systematically undermine my relationship with Sarah by highlighting every small disagreement or moment of tension between us and magnifying them into major relationship problems. During these conversations, Margaret would encourage Sarah to share details about our arguments, our intimate moments, and our private discussions. Margaret would then use this information to convince Sarah that our problems were more serious than they actually were and that I was not the right partner for her long-term happiness. Margaret's manipulation extended to our social circle and extended family. She would make subtle comments to Sarah's friends and relatives about concerns she had regarding our marriage, always framing her interference as loving worry about Sarah's well-being. Margaret was careful to never directly criticize me, but she would plant suggestions that I might not be as committed to the marriage as Sarah was, or that I might not be mature enough for the responsibilities of married life. These conversations had the effect of creating a network of people who began to question our relationship and offer Sarah unsolicited advice about her marriage. Sarah began receiving comments from friends and family members who had been influenced by Margaret's subtle campaign of doubt and concern. The most damaging aspect of Margaret's manipulation was the way she used Sarah's grief over her father's death as a weapon against our marriage. Margaret would tell Sarah that her father had expressed private concerns about our relationship before he died, claiming that he had worried about whether I was the right person for Sarah but had been too polite to say anything directly. These alleged deathbed concerns were completely fabricated, but they were devastating to Sarah because she couldn't verify them with her father. Margaret used Sarah's inability to confirm or deny these claims to plant deep doubts about whether her father had approved of our marriage and whether she had made the right choice in marrying me. Margaret also began creating artificial crises and emergencies that required Sarah's immediate attention and support. She would have mysterious health scares that turned out to be nothing, financial problems that needed urgent solutions, or emotional breakdowns that required Sarah to drop everything and rush to her mother's side. These manufactured emergencies served multiple purposes in Margaret's manipulation strategy. They demonstrated to Sarah that her mother needed her more than I did. They created opportunities for Margaret to have extended private conversations with Sarah about our marriage, and they established a pattern where Margaret's needs always took priority over our relationship. The frequency and timing of these emergencies were suspicious, but Margaret was skilled at making them seem genuine and urgent. She would have chest pains that required emergency room visits but turned out to be anxiety attacks. She would have financial crises that needed immediate attention but were actually the result of her own poor planning. She would have emotional meltdowns about missing Sarah's father, but these would always happen at moments when Sarah and I were trying to spend quality time together. Margaret's manipulation reached its peak when Sarah and I began discussing starting a family. Margaret immediately began expressing concerns about whether we were ready for the responsibilities of parenthood, whether we could afford children, and whether our marriage was stable enough to provide a secure environment for raising kids. Margaret told Sarah that she was worried about how having children might change our relationship and whether I would be a good father. She suggested that perhaps Sarah should wait until she was more certain about our marriage before making such a major commitment. Margaret even went so far as to suggest that Sarah should consider whether she wanted to have children with someone who might not be her life partner. These conversations about starting a family became the battleground where Margaret's manipulation campaign reached its most destructive phase. She convinced Sarah that having children with me would be a mistake that would trap her in an unhappy marriage and prevent her from finding true happiness with someone else. Sarah began pulling away from me emotionally and physically. She became distant and critical, questioning every decision I made and every plan we had discussed for our future. She started spending more time with her mother and less time with me, claiming that she needed space to think about what she really wanted from life and marriage. I realized that Margaret's manipulation was succeeding in destroying our marriage, but I also understood that confronting Sarah directly about her mother's behavior would only make things worse. Sarah was so deeply under Margaret's influence that she would likely interpret any criticism of her mother as an attack on their relationship and further evidence that I didn't understand or support her family bonds. Instead, I decided to investigate Margaret's manipulation more thoroughly and gather evidence of her deceptive behavior. I wanted to understand the full scope of her campaign against our marriage and find a way to expose her manipulation without appearing to attack Sarah's relationship with her mother. I began paying closer attention to Margaret's behavior and documenting the patterns in her manipulation. I noticed that her health emergencies always seemed to happen when Sarah and I had important plans or were working through relationship issues. Her financial crises always required solutions that would take Sarah away from me for extended periods. Her emotional breakdowns always focused on topics that would make Sarah question our marriage. I also began investigating Margaret's claims about Sarah's father's alleged concerns about our relationship. I spoke with other family members and friends who had known Sarah's father well, and I discovered that he had never expressed any doubts about our marriage to anyone. In fact, several people told me that he had been very happy about Sarah's choice to marry me and had often spoken positively about our relationship. This discovery was crucial because it revealed that Margaret had been lying about her deceased husband's feelings about our marriage. She had been using Sarah's grief and her inability to verify these claims as weapons to undermine our relationship. This was not just manipulation, it was a cruel exploitation of Sarah's love and respect for her father's memory. I also discovered that Margaret had been having similar conversations with other family members and friends, spreading different versions of her concerns about our marriage depending on her audience. She had been telling some people that she was worried about my commitment to Sarah, while telling others that she was concerned about Sarah's happiness in the marriage. Margaret was playing different sides against each other to create maximum doubt and confusion about our relationship. Most disturbing of all, I learned that Margaret had been researching divorce lawyers and had even scheduled consultations to discuss what Sarah's options would be if she decided to end our marriage. Margaret was not just trying to undermine our relationship. She was actively preparing for Sarah to leave me and was gathering information about how to make that process as advantageous as possible for Sarah. I realized that Margaret's manipulation was not just about controlling Sarah or interfering in our marriage. It was a calculated campaign to destroy our relationship completely and permanently. Margaret wanted me out of Sarah's life, and she was willing to use lies, manipulation, and exploitation of grief to achieve that goal. I decided that Margaret needed to face consequences for her manipulation, but I also knew that my approach had to be strategic and comprehensive. I couldn't just confront her directly because she would deny everything and probably convince Sarah that I was being paranoid or controlling. Instead, I needed to expose Margaret's manipulation in a way that would be undeniable and would help Sarah understand what had been happening to our marriage. The plan I developed was designed to reveal Margaret's true character and motivations to Sarah and to everyone else who had been influenced by her manipulation. I wanted Margaret to be exposed as the manipulative liar she was, and I wanted Sarah to understand that her mother had been systematically sabotaging our marriage for her own selfish reasons. Phase 1 involved gathering comprehensive evidence of Margaret's lies and manipulation. I began recording conversations with Margaret when possible, documenting her contradictory statements to different people, and collecting evidence of her manufactured emergencies and crises. I also began reaching out to other family members and friends to gather their perspectives on Margaret's behavior and to document the different versions of her concerns that she had been sharing with different people. I wanted to show that Margaret's manipulation was not just directed at Sarah and me, but was part of a broader pattern of deceptive behavior. Phase 2 involved exposing Margaret's lies about Sarah's father's alleged concerns about our marriage. I gathered statements from family members and friends who could testify that Sarah's father had never expressed doubts about our relationship and had, in fact, been very supportive of our marriage. I also found evidence that Margaret had been making similar false claims about her deceased husband's opinions on other family matters, suggesting that this was a pattern of behavior where she used his death to manipulate family members by claiming he had shared concerns or opinions that he had never actually expressed. Phase 3 involved revealing Margaret's research into divorce lawyers and her preparation for Sarah to leave me. I wanted Sarah to understand that her mother had not just been offering advice or expressing concerns, but had been actively working to end our marriage and had been preparing for that outcome before Sarah had even decided what she wanted to do. Phase 4 was more personal and involved helping Sarah understand how her mother's manipulation had affected her own emotional well-being and decision-making. I wanted Sarah to recognize that the doubts and concerns she had been feeling about our marriage were not entirely her own thoughts, but were the result of her mother's systematic campaign to undermine her confidence in our relationship. The final phase involved exposing Margaret's manipulation to the broader family and social circle that had been influenced by her lies and concerns. I wanted everyone to understand that Margaret's worries about our marriage had not been genuine expressions of concern, but had been part of a calculated campaign to destroy our relationship. The confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon in March, exactly 18 months after Margaret had begun her intensive campaign of manipulation. Sarah had been pulling away from me for weeks, and I knew that Margaret was preparing to encourage her to file for divorce. Margaret had scheduled another one of her emergency conversations with Sarah, claiming that she had been having chest pains and needed Sarah's support. Instead of allowing this manufactured crisis to proceed as usual, I presented Sarah with the comprehensive evidence I had gathered about her mother's manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I showed Sarah recordings of Margaret making contradictory statements about our marriage to different people, documentation of the timing of her manufactured emergencies, and proof that she had been researching divorce lawyers without Sarah's knowledge. Most importantly, I presented Sarah with testimony from multiple family members and friends confirming that her father had never expressed concerns about our marriage and had, in fact, been very supportive of our relationship. This evidence revealed that Margaret had been lying about her deceased husband's feelings to manipulate Sarah's emotions and undermine our marriage. Sarah's reaction was initially one of disbelief and denial. She couldn't accept that her mother, who claimed to love her and want the best for her, had been systematically manipulating her and lying to her for months. Sarah accused me of misinterpreting Margaret's behavior and suggested that I was being paranoid about her mother's natural concern for our marriage. But the evidence was too comprehensive and too detailed for Sarah's denials to be sustainable. The recordings of Margaret's contradictory statements were clear and undeniable. The documentation of her manufactured emergencies showed a pattern that was too consistent to be coincidental. The testimony from family members about her father's true feelings about our marriage was unanimous and convincing. As Sarah processed the evidence, I could see her beginning to understand the full scope of her mother's manipulation. She realized that many of the doubts and concerns she had been feeling about our marriage were not her own authentic feelings, but were the result of her mother's systematic campaign to undermine her confidence in our relationship. Sarah also began to understand how her mother had been exploiting her grief over her father's death to manipulate her emotions and decision-making. The realization that Margaret had been lying about her deceased husband's feelings about our marriage was particularly devastating because it revealed the depths of her mother's willingness to manipulate and deceive. That afternoon, I also shared the evidence of Margaret's manipulation with key family members and friends who had been influenced by her campaign of doubt and concern. I wanted them to understand that Margaret's worries about our marriage had not been genuine expressions of concern, but had been part of a calculated effort to destroy our relationship. The reaction from family and friends was shock and anger as they realized how Margaret had been manipulating them and using them as unwitting participants in her campaign against our marriage. Many of them felt betrayed and used, understanding that Margaret had been exploiting their love and concern for Sarah to achieve her own agenda. The legal and social consequences for Margaret were swift and comprehensive. Sarah confronted her mother about the manipulation and lies, demanding explanations for her behavior and accountability for the damage she had caused to our marriage. Margaret initially tried to deny everything and claim that I was turning Sarah against her own mother. She accused me of being controlling and manipulative, suggesting that I was the one who was trying to isolate Sarah from her family. But the evidence of her manipulation was too overwhelming for her denials to be credible. When Margaret realized that her denials weren't working, she changed tactics and tried to justify her behavior by claiming that she had been acting out of love and concern for Sarah's happiness. She suggested that she had been trying to protect Sarah from making a mistake and that all of her actions had been motivated by her desire to see Sarah in a happy and fulfilling marriage. But Sarah had finally seen through her mother's manipulation and understood that Margaret's actions had not been motivated by love or concern, but by a desire to control and manipulate. Sarah realized that her mother had been willing to destroy her marriage and exploit her grief to achieve her own agenda. The most satisfying aspect of Margaret's exposure was watching her realize that her manipulation had not only failed but had backfired completely. Instead of destroying our marriage, her campaign of lies and manipulation had actually strengthened our relationship by helping us understand the external forces that had been working against us. Sarah and I were able to work through the damage that Margaret's manipulation had caused to our relationship. Sarah understood that many of the doubts and concerns she had been feeling were not authentic reflections of problems in our marriage, but were the result of her mother's systematic campaign to undermine her confidence in our relationship. Our marriage became stronger as we worked together to rebuild the trust and intimacy that Margaret's manipulation had damaged. Sarah gained confidence in her own judgment and learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and emotional exploitation. She also developed stronger boundaries with her mother and refused to allow Margaret to continue interfering in our relationship. Margaret's manipulation had not only failed to destroy our marriage, but had actually helped us understand the importance of protecting our relationship from external interference and manipulation. We learned to communicate more openly about outside influences on our relationship and to support each other against attempts to undermine our bond. The broader family and social consequences for Margaret were severe and long-lasting. Her reputation in the community was damaged as people realized that she had been manipulating and lying to achieve her own agenda. Many family members and friends felt betrayed by her deception and began to question other aspects of their relationships with her. Margaret also lost her close relationship with Sarah, who could no longer trust her mother after discovering the extent of her manipulation and lies. Sarah established firm boundaries with Margaret and refused to allow her to continue playing a central role in her life and decision-making. Most importantly, Margaret's campaign of manipulation had revealed her true character to everyone who mattered to her. People understood that she was capable of sophisticated deception and emotional manipulation, and that she was willing to exploit grief and family loyalty to achieve her own selfish goals. The revenge I orchestrated against Margaret was comprehensive and devastating, but it was also necessary to protect my marriage and expose the truth about her manipulative behavior. Margaret had chosen to wage a campaign of lies and manipulation against our relationship, and she had to face the full consequences of those choices. Looking back on this experience, I am proud of the way Sarah and I worked together to overcome Margaret's manipulation and strengthen our marriage. We learned that we could trust each other completely and that we were willing to fight for our relationship against any external threats or interference. The marriage that Margaret had tried so hard to destroy became stronger and more resilient as a result of our experience with her manipulation. We developed better communication skills, stronger boundaries with family members, and a deeper understanding of the importance of protecting our relationship from outside interference. Margaret's manipulation had failed completely, and her attempt to control Sarah's life had backfired in the most devastating way possible. She had lost her relationship with her daughter, her reputation in the community, and the respect of family members and friends who had discovered her deceptive behavior. The revenge was complete, the truth was exposed, and our marriage was finally free from Margaret's toxic influence and manipulation. We had won not just a battle against a manipulative mother-in-law, but a victory for the principle that love and trust should never be weaponized for selfish purposes. Sarah and I went on to build the life and family that we had always dreamed of, free from Margaret's interference and manipulation. We learned valuable lessons about the importance of recognizing and resisting emotional manipulation, and we used those lessons to create a stronger and more authentic relationship. Margaret's story became a cautionary tale in our family and community about the dangers of using manipulation and lies to control other people's lives. Her downfall served as a reminder that deception and emotional exploitation ultimately destroy the relationships they are meant to preserve or control. In the end, Margaret's campaign of manipulation had achieved the opposite of what she intended. Instead of driving me away from Sarah, it had brought us closer together. Instead of controlling Sarah's life, it had helped Sarah develop independence and confidence in her own judgment. Instead of preserving her relationship with her daughter, it had destroyed that relationship permanently. The most important outcome of this entire experience was that Sarah was able to reclaim her autonomy and her ability to make decisions about her own life and marriage. She was no longer under her mother's control or influence, and she was free to build the future that she and I had chosen together. Our children grew up knowing the story of how their grandmother had tried to destroy their parents' marriage through manipulation and lies, and how their parents had fought to protect their relationship and expose the truth. They learned valuable lessons about the importance of honesty, integrity, and recognizing the signs of emotional manipulation. Margaret's attempt to control our marriage had revealed her true character and had ultimately led to her complete exclusion from our lives. The woman who had claimed to love Sarah and want the best for her had actually been willing to destroy Sarah's happiness to satisfy her own need for control and manipulation. The revenge I orchestrated against Margaret was not just about exposing her lies and manipulation. It was about ensuring that she faced the full consequences of her betrayal of her daughter's trust and her attempt to destroy our marriage for her own selfish reasons. Margaret learned that manipulation and emotional exploitation come with a price that extends far beyond the immediate goals they are meant to achieve. She lost her family, her reputation, and her place in the community that had once respected her. She discovered that the trust and love of family members, once broken through deception and manipulation, cannot be easily repaired or replaced. The most satisfying aspect of Margaret's downfall was knowing that her manipulation had been completely transparent to me from the beginning, and that her sophisticated campaign of lies and deception had ultimately been exposed and defeated. She had underestimated both Sarah's intelligence and my determination to protect our marriage, and she had paid the ultimate price for that miscalculation. In the end, justice was served not just through the exposure of Margaret's manipulation, but through the natural consequences of her own actions. Her lies and deception had created the very situation that led to her downfall, and her attempts to control our marriage had ultimately resulted in her losing all connection to our family. The marriage that Margaret had tried to destroy became the foundation for our family's happiness and prosperity. The trust that she had tried to undermine became stronger through our experience of overcoming her manipulation together. And the love that she had tried to weaponize became the source of our strength and resilience in building the life we had always wanted. Margaret's story serves as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to use manipulation and lies to control other people's relationships and life choices. The consequences of such betrayal extend far beyond the immediate goals and can destroy the very relationships that the manipulation is meant to preserve or control. The revenge I orchestrated against Margaret was complete and devastating, but it was also justified and necessary to protect my marriage and ensure that the truth was revealed. Margaret had chosen to wage a campaign of manipulation and lies against our relationship, and she had to face the full consequences of those choices. Looking back on this experience, I am grateful for the way it strengthened our marriage and helped us develop the skills and boundaries necessary to protect our relationship from future threats. We learned that love and trust are precious gifts that should never be taken for granted or used as weapons against the people we claim to care about. The family legacy that Margaret had claimed to be protecting was ultimately preserved and strengthened through our efforts to expose her manipulation and build an authentic relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. Our marriage became a model for our children and our community of what love and partnership should look like when they are free from manipulation and control. Margaret's manipulation had failed completely, and her attempt to control our lives had backfired in the most devastating way possible. She had lost everything that mattered to her, while we had gained not only our freedom from her influence but also a deeper understanding of our own strength and commitment to each other. The revenge was complete, the justice was served, and our marriage was finally free to flourish without the shadow of Margaret's manipulation and lies hanging over us. We had won not just a personal victory but a moral triumph that would shape our family's values and priorities for generations to come.